The story begins with Nelson, a wealthy man, running naked down the road, chased by a group of goons. He narrowly escapes by jumping into a car, infuriating the boss of the goons, who punishes one of his men for failing to catch Nelson. Not long after, Nelson is sentenced to 18 months in prison for driving under the influence. Even during his arrest, he is still drunk, but when he sobers up, he realizes the gravity of his situation. His freedom is gone. Nelson's introduction to prison life is harsh. Inside the prison, Nelson struggles to adjust. He's isolated, unable to connect with the other inmates, being used to a life of wealth and luxury. He soon experiences the harshness of prison life when he's bullied by the older inmates, who see him as weak. Despite this, Nelson befriends another inmate named Roach, who, like him, is also harassed by the more powerful prisoners. One day, Nelson witnesses a prisoner named Haken being brutally beaten by the others for being a rapist. Roach explains that the inmates take justice into their own hands and despise people like Haken. Although the warden removes Haken from the prison, claiming a lack of evidence, the prisoners continue their violent form of justice. Nelson begins to confide in Roach, telling him about his past life. He reveals that before prison, he was obsessed with his lavish lifestyle, partying and driving around in his expensive car. He recounts the night he drunkenly ran over an elderly woman with his car and fled the scene instead of helping her. This incident led to his arrest, and despite his family's wealth and his mother's efforts to free him, Nelson confessed to his crime and received his sentence. As Nelson adapts to prison life, he learns that cigarettes serve as currency. He becomes dependent on them, gambling with Roach and learning to defend himself. Roach also teaches him that the guards frequently search the inmates, and that any contraband found leads to solitary confinement. There's an unwritten rule where a prisoner can take the blame for another in exchange for 2 packets of cigarettes. Nelson learns about a prisoner named Brother Jetto, who controls the smuggling of contraband within the prison. Roach convinces Nelson to buy cigarettes from Jetto, but Jetto charges exorbitant prices. Roach, realizing Nelson isn't easily swayed by money, tries to make some profit, but Nelson, being wealthy, doesn't care much. Later, Nelson's mother visits him in jail, promising that she's working on getting him a good lawyer to secure his release. However, Nelson, having confessed to his crime, is more concerned about his car aging by the time he gets out than his situation in prison. After his mother's visit, Nelson requests that money be sent to a girl named Vivian, his second girlfriend, as well as to Brother Jetto. Soon after, a new prisoner named Jack arrives, and Nelson immediately recognizes him. Jack was one of the men chasing Nelson in the beginning, when Nelson was running naked. Jack, who was drunk at a party, had been left by Nelson, who took Jack's girlfriend with him. The next morning, when Jack realized what had happened, he started pursuing Nelson. However, Jack's aggressive behavior in prison leads him to be isolated in solitary confinement, giving Nelson some peace. As time passes, Nelson gains a reputation in the prison by generously giving out cigarettes, earning respect from other inmates. He lives comfortably, with favorite foods and privacy during his showers. He even manages to have some prisoners act as his servants. However, when Jack is released from solitary, he quickly asserts his dominance by attacking the leader of their cell block and breaking his teeth, establishing himself as the new leader. Nelson, a skilled basketball player, joins in a game where his team faces off against Jack's. Despite his worries, Jack doesn't recognize Nelson due to a change in his hairstyle. Later, Nelson orders his servants to write letters to both May and Vivian, but they accidentally reveal the existence of the other woman in each letter, setting the stage for future conflict. Meanwhile, Jack's uncle visits him and informs Jack about Nelson's whereabouts, although Nelson is unaware of this. On Nelson's birthday, he throws a feast for the inmates, making Uncle Dad and Brother Jetto happy. However, Jack starts causing trouble, which leads to him being locked up again. That night, Nelson's men bake him a cake and let him enjoy a private bath, but Jack is waiting for him afterward. Although Nelson is frightened, nothing happens. The next morning, guards conduct a surprise search, and Roach reveals that Jack had tried to set Nelson up by hiding drugs in his belongings. Roach, who owed Jack cigarettes, was pressured into this but refused to betray his friend. As a result, both Jack and Roach are sent to solitary confinement. Nelson misses Roach and reflects on their bond when Roach returns, strengthening their friendship as they discuss their families. Eventually, Jack and Nelson decide to settle their differences with a bet during a game. Nelson wagers 1,000 packets of cigarettes, but Jack, uninterested in cigarettes, proposes that the loser must get their younger wrestler tattooed. Nelson loses the bet and is forced to endure the tattoo, which leaves him in a weakened state. During this time, May visits Nelson, furious after receiving the letter meant for Vivian. Feeling betrayed, she breaks up with Nelson and leaves him. That same night, Roach dies, leaving Nelson devastated. He suspects Jack's involvement, but the guards inform him that Roach died after learning of his daughter's death in an accident. Despite this, Nelson remains convinced that Jack is somehow responsible. The prison atmosphere shifts, and Nelson finds himself increasingly isolated. Uncle Dad criticizes Nelson, calling him a spoiled rich man who lacks self-control. This stings Nelson, who then learns about Uncle Dad's tragic past, how he ended up in prison trying to protect his son, only to lose him to a drug-related police encounter. Uncle Dad's story prompts Nelson to reflect on his own life, and he decides to change his ways. Nelson soon hears that Uncle Dad has been attacked, and he immediately suspects Jack. Fueled by rage, Nelson attacks Jack, but in a twist, one of Jack's own men turns on him and brutally kills Jack. Although Nelson is locked up during the fight, he feels a sense of satisfaction, believing that Uncle Dad and Roach's deaths have been avenged. Finally, when Nelson is released from prison, he confronts his mother, blaming her for spoiling him. However, with his newfound determination to change, Nelson works hard to rebuild his life. After 3 years, he marries May and settles down, having finally turned his life around. And with that, Nelson's tumultuous journey comes to an end, leaving him as a reformed man who has learned from his mistakes. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Follow for more videos.